All right, I'll just have a few things to say and then happy to take any questions. First of all, I want to thank Governor Parson for heeding our call for a special session request with the Missouri General Assembly. Violent crime is an important, vital, central issue, I think, to the future of the quality of life, not just in Kansas City or in St. Louis or in St. Louis County or in Springfield, but throughout the entire state of Missouri. We've seen this year to be an historic one and an historically challenging year for us in how we address violent crime issues in Missouri and in Kansas City. And so I do thank him for that. I had the chance to talk to Governor Parson yesterday about the special session. We talked about any number of issues, many of which we agree on, some of which we do not. One issue that we agree upon, and I think that most sane people agree upon, is on witness protection funding in the state of Missouri. You may remember that earlier this year, actually earlier in my term, late 2019, a group of mayors, including myself, Lyda Cruzen of St. Louis, Brian Treese of Columbia, and Ken McClure of Springfield, met together to push a number of issues that we would like to see passed in the Missouri General Assembly. Among those issues, a priority was witness protection funding. We hear time and time again here in Kansas City, I know Lyda in St. Louis often hears about situations where there are folks that want to talk but cannot feel safe, do not feel safe being in their community, and our witness protection funding will be an important part of it. We've also, as mayors throughout Missouri's largest cities, talked about other important initiatives. Mental health funding, greater access for our mental health triage centers so that our police officers who are interacting with folks in mental health crisis have somewhere to take them that's other than an emergency room or a county jail. Unfortunately, that is not one of the topics that has been raised in this special session. I do believe that's a missed opportunity, and I would encourage the Missouri General Assembly in January to take up that issue again. It is not enough to say that there are other issues that are at the roots of violent crime time and time again, but to never address them. And I think, unfortunately, we're not addressing that issue today, and I think that'll be a challenge. You'll also see that the governor had announced a very specific call in connection with a police residency requirement in the city of St. Louis. I understand that has been an issue and a topic discussed for St. Louisans for some time. It has the support of the mayor of St. Louis. I'm not sure it has the support of the majority of alderpersons there, and it certainly is not a perspective that Kansas City, the city council, this mayor, or the board of police commissioners thinks is essential for the Kansas City, Missouri Police Department or our city. In Kansas City, we appreciate our officers living in Kansas City. We have 14 school districts. We have a large city. We have a lot of different places where officers can go, and I think our officers know that we do respect them. We appreciate their service each day. Even where we may have political differences from all different types of groups, we recognize that it's important that Kansas City has its officers living here. When you look at some of the issues in our country lately, Minneapolis, for example, where 8% of police officers lived within city limits, I'm glad of the fact that 100% of our officers are here in Kansas City. To talk briefly about a few other items that are in the governor's special session announcement, but with which I may have some level of disagreement, I will note the following. While it certainly is important to address gun crimes and their impact upon children, both I and a number of other mayors in Missouri wanted to see legislation that related to ways we could keep firearms out of the hands of children, finding ways that we could actually make it so there weren't guns accessible to young people. That is not something we see today. You've also seen in Kansas City us push legislation relating to making sure guns are kept out of the hands of domestic abusers. In Kansas City, Missouri, we created city charges. I would enjoy seeing state charges where a domestic abuser picks up a firearm and is in many ways an enhanced threat to their intimate partners. That's something that we do not see today. What you do see is legislation that will largely enhance penalties in a number of different areas. I've said online, and I do believe this, that our 1980s and 1990s approaches to enforcement will not address our long-term crime issues. We can't just put people in prison longer. We need to find more ways to creatively solve crimes. That's why we've pushed witness protection. We need to find ways to get guns out of the hands of people who don't need to have them, children, domestic abusers. And we need to find ways to support mental health investments in the state of Missouri and in Kansas City so that those in crisis aren't creating more criminal activities in our community. Those are the sorts of things we would like to see in the future. Those are the sorts of things we'd like to see in future sessions. All that being said, I do continue to appreciate the governor and having a positive relationship with me, my office, and our Kansas City Police Department. I called him last Thursday, or actually several Thursdays ago now, after what was a particularly challenging week in Kansas City. We had 2 police officers who were shot, 1 critically. We had a week where a number of people were killed, including a 4-year-old. And every week in Kansas City, we continue to experience too much violence. Violence against children, violence against men in our community, violence against our officers. None of it is acceptable. The governor said a few times, and I'll make it clear as well, I support our law enforcement here in Kansas City. Every day they go out, they work hard for the best interests of the people of Kansas City. The tools that we were looking for, witness protection, mental health investment, getting guns off the streets, particularly out of the hands of people who don't need them, are tools that will make our law enforcement officers safer and our children safer. Repealing our 2017 legislative changes that altered concealed weapons laws in Missouri would make law enforcement officers, our children, our communities safer. Those are the sorts of things we need to continue to fight for. Although those may not be discussed in this legislative sessions, they're ones and they're issues that I remain committed to. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions you might have about this legislative session and certainly relating to violent crime. I will make one point before I take questions. If anybody's wondering, we remain significantly committed to how we address violent crime issues in Kansas City and throughout Missouri. My day started at the weekly shooting review of the Kansas City Police Department at 8 a.m. I went to the United States Courthouse and visited with the parents and the family of Legend Taliaferro. I've talked to many others, state legislators and beyond, about the work we need to do to make Kansas City and Missouri safer. There is not a more important task that I have as mayor, and I think not a more important issue for our community. With that, I'll take questions. I'll start with you, Allie.
You outlined a few areas where the governor is not taking up legislation. How transformative do you think that this list of policy issues could be if all were adopted?
His policy issues or ours? The mayor's?
The ones that they'll be taking up.
The ones in special session? I will, you know what, just for you, I will go one by one. It's not good television, but it's good for writers. Police and public safety employee residency requirements in St. Louis. This is in some ways why I have qualms with the residency requirement changing here. I don't think you can say that if you change where officers were living immediately, then that would change crime outcomes in any jurisdiction, including St. Louis. So I do not think that will be transformative. Juvenile certification, what that is it's a proposal that requires a court to determine if a juvenile should be certified for trial as an adult. We have tried that before. I remember being a child in this state when Governor Carnahan had signed in the 1990s legislation that allowed for us to certify more children as adults in criminal trials. I do not think it made Missourians safer then. I don't think it makes Missourians safer 25 years later. When you look at the witness statement admissibility, so hearsay is a rule that almost every lawyer knows, so this would in a way make it easier to get convictions with different witness statement admissibility rules. You know, I don't try cases every day. Perhaps that will make things easier. I do think that we still need to have a good, strong criminal justice process, an adversarial process, and so taking away defendants' rights, I don't think immediately is a way that we can actually modify things. A witness protection fund, as I've mentioned before, is outstanding, and that will make a great difference, I think, for the people of Kansas City and the people of Missouri. The endangering the welfare of a child provision relates to making modifying the offenses of endangering the welfare of a child. I believe if you commit a weapons offense or you encourage a child to commit a weapons offense. I understand where that's coming from. Some of the folks, particularly in the drug trafficking business, who may hand or provide firearms to young people. We do want to discourage that level of activity. I think there will ultimately be proof issues as to whether you gave the child the firearm, did you encourage them? I think it's easier said than done to actually make that a good enforceable provision. And then finally, unlawful transfer of weapons is a proposal the governor had mentioned, which would increase the penalty for a person who knowingly sells or delivers a firearm to any child who's less than 18 years old. You know, that will make some difference, but it seems as if we're kind of dancing around the edges of how do we make a real difference. How do we actually make it so we are seizing firearms from those who don't need to have them? How are we making a difference? You know, right now in Kansas City, if there is someone, because we changed our firearms laws, If there is someone who actually is driving around with a firearm, and of course you don't need a license for it, you don't need any level of training, you can't actually have an officer stop the person and seize the firearm unless they have some warrants or anything like that. And so I think there are much better steps and bolder steps we can make to addressing our violent crime problems. And so, like I said, I think 1 out of the 6 proposals can be a game changer in Missouri. I think 5 out of the 6 will not move the needle as much as some would hope. And I think many of us know things that could move the needle. That's mental health. That's addressing guns once and for all. That's taking some real concrete steps in action for Missouri.
You kind of alluded to this with the mention of Minneapolis, but do you see any connection between not requiring police officers to live in the city and systemic racism?
I think a big part of what we are all trying to figure out now, and I see this when I talk to police officers here in Kansas City, is how do we build better community trust, right? There's a reason we have a police athletic league. There's a reason we have community interaction officers. There's a reason why we have invested, I think, significantly as a department to have social workers and so many others. It's because we realize that the better trust you have with a community, the more likely it is that very community will talk to you. The more likely it is that community will let you know what's going on, who the people are that are engaged with all types of different things. And I think another step of that is having police officers who, believe it or not, vote for the same mayor or against him or her, are part of the same kind of community involvement, are in the same schools. And I would say with Kansas City, it does do us a service to have officers who I know to be intricately involved in caring about the future of our community. I shudder to think about the fact that if they change the residency requirement in St. Louis and you have somebody who lives, in Belleville, Illinois, is that person more attuned to issues in the central west end of St. Louis? I don't think so. And I think if we were to look to it in Kansas City, I don't think I could say that somebody who lives in Olathe is necessarily better attuned to issues in Kansas City, Missouri than somebody who lives here, goes to sleep here, has a family here, has children here. And so that's why I think those types of rules are important for us, and that's why I support them sticking around. Any other questions for you? Yes?
Governor Parson was talking in his Q&A. He says that he thinks there should be more police officers on the ground, and then he kind of went on to say that the reason why our police officers are maxed out is because of protests. So he kind of blamed it on the protest. Do you think you agree?
And by the way, good to see you. I know you're often in Wyandotte County, so we're happy to have you here today. I would say that no. Our violent crime problems are not linked to the protests. The reason I know that is because I became mayor back on August 1 of last year. Someone got murdered that night. Somebody got murdered the next night. I think 7 people got murdered within the next week. And it has been kind of a consistent trend for the entire year. The night the Chiefs won the AFC Championship game, you may remember we had a mass shooting, actually, out in East Kansas City. So to suggest that peaceful protesters are part of, I think, our challenges in violent crime, I think misses the mark. I think, it is fair to say our police have had to work hard, and that's absolutely right. And I commend them for that. Heck, I sent a letter thanking all of them and got a lot of flack for that, because I do think that this has been a challenging summer for our law enforcement folks. But I do not think that when we look at our ongoing violent crime challenges, particularly the trend line that you have in Kansas City, the trend line you have in St. Louis, the trend line you've had throughout the state of Missouri, Columbia, Springfield, I don't think it's fair to say that it's relating to protest and being taxed in connection with that. In terms of having officers on the ground, and I would usually phrase it in a different way and saying officers in the community. I think it is very important that we have officers in the community who have the chance to interact, who have the chance to get to know neighborhoods and organizations. I will always support that, and I supported that when I was city councilman, when I was running for mayor, and I'll continue to. And let's talk briefly about another issue that will be very important for this city, and that's the budget for the Kansas City Police Department. There is a significant conversation going on in our country about abolishing police, or I think significantly reducing budgets without any thought about how you actually fund what's necessary. I do not support those efforts. I am someone who believes that we need to make sure that we are adequately funding police, particularly as we want them to address important issues for us. I don't think it would be helpful for us to cut millions of dollars out of a budget so we couldn't actually have new recruiting classes. New recruiting classes that have black officers, Latino officers, more female officers, a lot of things people have been asking for. And so I think as we look at our budget future, we need to actually see, all right, what are important programmatic things that we need from our department? How can we actually address them? And not just how we can join in kind of the middle of a culture war that's happening throughout our country. That's an area that I'm not interested in, one that I hope here in Kansas City, and again, we might get to a point where we see that there are some budget reductions. I'm somebody who wants us always to get rid of lawyers, administrators, bureaucracy. I'm with that. And I think that's just fiscal responsibility. What I'm not about is just saying, hey, let's just cut $30 million because, it seems like a good thing to do. Yes, sir.
Can you talk about the 200 layoffs in the social services?
Yeah, absolutely. So actually, good reporting from the Kansas City Star today is where I learned it, reporting about layoffs, significant layoffs in Missouri government. As it turns out, I think relating to budget cuts, the state of Missouri is planning to lay off about 500 or eliminate 500 positions. 200 of those are unfilled, 300 of those are filled. Of those 300, 200 come from the Department of Social Services. I mean, at a certain point, you have to ask yourself, what are we doing, right? Social services are vital and important, and it is so interesting that we're having a conversation right now about violent crime. And everybody says, oh yeah, but there are also these precedent issues. But you know what? What leads to violent crime is the fact that you have people that aren't actually getting good counseling after they've been abused. It's people that can't find good homes. It's children that don't have an opportunity to get, I think, the level of respect that we need from our society that so many other children do. And so for the state, in its fairly significant cuts, to make them so significant in one area, in one department, 80 as an 80 out of children's services is abhorrent to me. And, we don't live in a Missouri bubble. My heart's broken by the 3-year-old who was murdered in Kansas City, Kansas, which I think in no small part relates to a failure of their Division of Children and Family Services in the state of Kansas. And for us in Missouri to be looking like we're going down the exact same path is something that I think is exceedingly troubling. I think it is a threat to public safety. I think it's a threat to child welfare. I think it's a threat to the people of Missouri. And I hope it's something that they reconsider as soon as possible.
Will you be looking at adding more money for mental health and other
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I had a conversation with the governor yesterday where we talked about needing more money in the mental health arena. And sometimes people think that we're actually just busy on partisan issues. We're not. If I had critiques for people, it's actually a critique I have for Governor Jay Nixon, a Democrat in Missouri, when we first saw reduced funding to our mental health triage center in Kansas City at 12th and Prospect. Look, we can't just pay lip service to what's important. You can't just say mental health is important. Finding opportunities for counseling for our children, finding money for de-escalation are important issues, and continue to cut budgets there. You can't say that these are priority areas, but then actually when you look at it, it appears that it's not. And so I think that, yes, we would try to find every dollar available in Kansas City, noting that we don't have a lot. But I'll tell you this, we're planning budget cuts now in Kansas City. You'll see budget cuts out of the mayor's office, for example. What I'm not cutting are social services and the social worker group at the police department. Because in Kansas City, at least, we try to show that what we think is important will get funded. And that's the sort of thing that I would love to see from more government agencies, and particularly ones that have some importance to us. Ms. Kine?
You said you talked to the governor about this special session. Did he say that these are the policy priorities that I'm going to focus on, or did he tell you, what he would be targeting?
Some of it's a private conversation, I'll leave that, but in terms of the pure public stuff, what I will just say is we talked about witness protection because that was something I'd met with him about before. We talked about better mental health funding, and we talked about the residency issue. I think that, some of the others are child welfare, juvenile certification were not things that we covered. Had they been, I probably would have shown some of my lack of interest or attraction in those proposals. But, I will say this. The governor has shown a willingness to work with us. I do hope we see witness protection get past the finish line. I've appreciated the open line of communication that we've had with him, and I hope that if he is the governor in the next session, then we will have more conversations about, I think, a lot of these other important steps, including mental health investments, some of our gun laws that I think are counterproductive to fighting violent crime in Missouri. And I'll also note this, I've talked to a number of members of the state legislature, including those in the majority Republican leadership, And I think many of them know that violent crime is a sufficiently important issue that we need to find areas of agreement. Hopefully witness protection is the first part of it. Are there any other questions for you? If not, thank you all so much.